So it's my great pleasure today to welcome you to the second of our Zoom guest talks. And today our guest is Alfie Bown, and Alfie is lecturer in media arts at Royal Holloway University in London. He is the author of 3 monographs: Enjoying It, Candy Crush and Capitalism, the PlayStation Dreamworld, and In the Event of Laughter. He has also edited 3 anthologies, Everyday Analysis and Post Memes, Seizing the Memes of Production. He writes for The Guardian, The Paris Review, New Statesman, LA Review of Books, Tribune Magazine, Cabinet, and other places. And his long-running project, Everyday Analysis, can be found at everydayanalysis.net. So Alfie, it's great to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much to everyone for coming, and especially thanks to Anna and to Lucas for inviting me. I'm basically, I did my PhD in a English and American Studies department, not that dissimilar to yours, I suppose. But I've sort of migrated somewhat to what I guess is called media studies, which here is called media arts. And I basically work on the relationship between psychoanalysis and digital culture, hence why I've written these books, one on video games, one on mobile phone cultures, one on around the question of memes, which is maybe slightly connected to this. But yeah, the main sort of daily thing that I dedicate time to is this project called Everyday Analysis, which is essentially an attempt to use psychoanalytic theory and its connections to Marxism to explore everyday life. We started that project in 2012, but we're a kind of collective with, well, lots of perhaps sort of 6 or 8 core members, but hundreds of contributors and sort of interlocutors. And at the beginning, it was this kind of popular culture analysis thing. So using psychoanalysis and theory to understand kind of everyday life, everything from video games, TV, children's toys, movies, and so on. But around 2015, we kind of closed it because we felt it wasn't political enough, and then recently kind of relaunched this project as a much more directly kind of political project, which aims to ask the question of what psychoanalysis and Marxism together can do for the left, for the political left, in these kind of times of crisis that we've been seem to continually be going through since at least 2014-15. Of course, the idea of Marxism as an ally of the left is well trodden, and so what's more unique is the role of psychoanalysis in these discourses. And so it's been our kind of project to push this idea that psychoanalysis shouldn't be associated with elite culture, as it kind of typically has been, nor should it be associated just with elite men. So many of our contributors focus on the relationship between feminism, psychoanalysis, and Marxism. But that actually psychoanalysis could be an ally for the political progressive left going forward. And I'm going to talk about that in relation to what we're all kind of living through at the moment today. So I'm going to talk generally, first of all, about politics and coronavirus, particularly our responses to coronavirus. But I don't just mean our responses to it in terms of politics and in terms of legislation and in terms of rules and so on, but our emotional and instinctive kind of drives and responses to what we're going through, which is, of course, partly where psychoanalysis comes in already, in understanding our kind of actual instinctive and affectual reactions to what we're going through. And then, so I'm going to talk generally, first of all, about kind of coronavirus and politics. Some of it will be kind of UK focused, given that my experience of this has been limited to being here. But I'll kind of try and explain the kind of things in case people haven't sort of seen them that are going on in the UK, and it would be really interesting in the Q&A to discuss a bit how this might differ in any way from how things have been over there in Poland. And then towards the end, I'm going to make a kind of argument about this situation based on deploying one particular psychoanalytic concept, that of fetishist disavowal, and try and use this concept to understand our reactions to coronavirus and how through that we can connect psychoanalysis with Marxism in a useful way. So to begin, the first thing that I would like to say, and this again, I'm intrigued whether there's any connections or similarities with the UK experience and the one in Poland. Here, the first kind of point I'd like to make is that our reactions and responses to coronavirus have been clearly bound up in a particular kind of British nationalism. And of course, like many European countries, we're in a pretty depressing moment for the left politically. We have a stronger kind of conservative right government here than we have done. Well, it's been increasing its kind of stronghold over recent years. In 2019, the British left kind of fell and suffered a very damaging defeat to Boris Johnson's Conservative Party. I'm sure you know about, this was very depressing for us Corbynistas and people trying to build a new left in the UK. And just as coronavirus came in, this was significantly kind of compounded by Keir Starmer's election as the leader of the Labour Party, which is really quite devastating for the British left, perhaps even more so than Corbyn's defeat itself, because what we had was a much younger movement of left-wing voices in British politics who were lobbying for Rebecca Long-Bailey to be the Labour leader, who is, very much in the vein of Jeremy Corbyn, but of course without this kind of reputation as an ancient member of the political classes. And she was kind of soundly beaten by this figure who's got a knighthood, his former lawyer called Sir Keir Starmer. He has very nice grey hair that a lot of liberals like, and a kind of authoritative kind of comb over, and he represents the return to the kind of political centre on the part of the Labour Party in the UK, which means that the UK left finds itself not directly associated with a political party anymore, although there are factions within who want to obviously build the Labour Party back in the direction it was going before. Generally speaking, this is quite a period of kind of alienation for many people on the left. That happened precisely the same time as the onset of coronavirus and the lockdown. I think this is a very sad state of affairs that the coronavirus seems to have been used to harness a kind of British nationalism and a kind of support for the conservative and neoliberal institutions, which was previously probably under its greatest period in my living memory anyway, in my lifetime for sure, of scrutiny and critique. And one of the things that has happened here is the assumption or the idea that the coronavirus shouldn't be political, which is why I called this talk Politicizing a Crisis, because there's a lot of emphasis in the UK that we shouldn't be politicizing this, that this is a human crisis, that this is something connected to science and connected to sort of human civilization, yes, but that's something which we shouldn't use to push a political agenda. And we have this rhetoric as well of needing to stick together and kind of unite in the face of this crisis. I'd be intrigued whether there's any similarity over there. But what has become very prominent is wartime language. The phrase "the Blitz spirit" has re-emerged, which refers to how British people clubbed together in World War II, and last week, on the same day as May Day, we celebrated VE Day, and whereas in 2017, for example, on the kind of upper curve of Jeremy Corbyn's popularity, May Day was celebrated pretty visibly as a kind of working class move, but a kind of celebration of class politics in some ways. This year, VE Day completely kind of usurped the celebration of May Day. And I think this embodies a kind of political shift that's happened, where kind of working class solidarity or cross-class solidarity has been or is gradually being replaced by a kind of nostalgic British nationalism, which is connected to war and so on. One of the things here is that this is very much in the spirit, as it were, of Brexit. And I think another specifically British angle, and again, I'm going to ask you guys about this after the talk, is that we kind of moved into this coronavirus as we were just coming out of this kind of Brexit world. And a lot of the strategies over here for responding to the pandemic seem to have kind of, let's say, rolled over from the Brexit campaign. For example, I don't know if you have this over there, but we basically took down our Leave and Remain posters from our windows, and then put up Save the NHS posters and posters saying stay at home, stay safe, things like this. You know, one particularly intriguing thing is this kind of bunting. You know, it's like a sort of party flags, which say on one side, clap for the NHS. So in the UK and also in Italy, I think it started in Italy actually, I'm not sure if you guys are doing this, on Thursday nights, on Thursday nights or at a particular given time, we're going outside and we're clapping outside the windows to show our support for the National Health Service or for those people at the forefront of battling against the virus. And you know, this is me being my most cynical, but this it's not wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong to support these institutions. It's more that the format for supporting them has rolled over from this kind of almost fascist attitudes at Brexit. And so what you see in the UK streets is this bunting where one triangle flag says clap for the NHS, and then the next one has a picture of the Union Jack, or even the St George's flag, which is a kind of racist symbol, and then maybe a phrase like the UK unites behind coronavirus. At the same time, another kind of media phenomenon here has been this old guy. I don't know if you've been unfortunate enough to see this 100-year-old guy called Captain Tom, right? Again, I'm sounding very critical and cynical. I don't have a problem with this 100-year-old guy, but he's a former war veteran who walked around his garden to raise money for the NHS, for our health service. I think he's raised £20 million or some insanely high amount, and that's I think it's good. I'm not saying it's nationalistic or fascist to raise money for your health service or to give charitably. What I'm saying is that the strategies for or formats for showing our feelings of solidarity and our affectual kind of relationship to this has kind of carried over from Brexit. So, you know, it's bizarre that in the UK we couldn't just give 20 million, we couldn't give charitably 20 million to the NHS until it was kind of mediated through this war imagery. So suddenly, you know, I think, like to repeat, I think it's wonderful that we've given charitably to the cause, but it can only happen in Britain when it's been kind of carefully mediated through this image of Britain as a united even war-oriented nation kind of uniting to fight for its common cause under the symbol of this kind of history of Britain. And the age of the guy is usually thought of as a very charming thing, or 100 years old and still doing it. But actually, he appeals specifically because of this nostalgia for empire and for Britain as a nation, which is somehow embodied by his kind of ancientness as well. So what we've got here is this kind of interesting situation where nationalism has come back in, and I mean, with the charity as well, there's a big political problem here, or a big political point, which I don't want to kind of gloss over, which is that the only reason we need to give so charitably to these causes is because our health service has been so underfunded over the last 10, 15 years by this Conservative government. So what we're seeing, obviously, in an ideal world, I mean, I think, again, I need to clarify that I think it's good that we're offering charitable support. You know, I'm doing everything I can that way as well in my local community. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this is primarily a political problem, because we only need to give this money through charity because of the austerity and underfunding of these services in the first place. So here, use of food banks is at an all-time high. You know, if our welfare state had been properly funded, it wouldn't be needed to that level. Likewise, people are being made homeless who were part of the renting community, people like myself, who, you know, which wouldn't be happening if renters were protected by housing law. And we wouldn't need to give so much money to the NHS charitably if the rich people here were sufficiently taxed and those taxes were redirected to those vital services like healthcare in the first place. So what we're looking at is almost like this kind of, in a way, I don't think I'm saying anything particularly controversial or even interesting. It's plainly obvious that both the governments and the BBC, who drive the media kind of force of the coverage around this, are deliberately trying to switch attention from a kind of political crisis, deeply rooted in kind of underfunding and the Tory austerity policies that we've been having over the last 2 decades, and switching that to a focus on Britain as a collective kind of nationalist united place. Here again, I think we need also this kind of psychoanalysis to just, I'm not going to get into it too technically just yet, but to understand how this works, because this is about emotion and affect and feeling. And what's interesting here is that, you know, people give charitably to Captain Tom's funds because it pulls on their heartstrings, right? It actually drives an emotional response. Whereas if the BBC simply say, please give some money to the NHS, nobody does anything. So the question is one of, how do we get into a situation where affects and feelings have been co-opted by class politics in this way? Why, actually, we do feel great when we clap out the window. But I mean, even the image of just clapping out the window, there is something very kind of dystopian about this. You know, this is what a gesture of solidarity is now. We agree a time, and then we go to the window and start clapping outside it, and we feel affectually positive. And there's an image of unity, there's a sort of sense of connection. And these are psychoanalytic problems. How do a set of class issues and political structures make it possible for things to be felt in this particular way, right? And then a secondary to that, who do those kind of feelings serve? I think one sort of playful, intriguing way to approach that question is by talking a bit about football. I don't know what's happening with the Polish league, but here has been quite bizarre, because initially football was one of the first things to shut down. So there was a kind of crisis of nationalism around this, and I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we would actually be watching whatever we would be preparing now for the European tournament, where, you know, Europe's nations will kind of compete against each other, and a lot of affect, a lot of nationalist spirit. I mean, don't get me wrong, I actually like football, but for the purposes of this, just pretend I don't. You know, you go out there and you're actually is a perfect example of how a structure of nationalism works on an affectual level. And in the UK, we have this kind of crisis. Oh my God, there's no football. You know, what are men going to do? What are we going to feel? Right, and actually, you've seen the politics offering people a way of feeling those kinds of emotions and directing them in a different direction. And I don't know if it's the same there, but we almost seem to have replaced the European Championships, but with the idea of competing with other nations in their coronavirus responses. So in our media, during the first segment of the crisis, there was a lot about China. Of course, that fed into the kind of ideas of Chinese flu and this kind of nationalism that this was coming from Wuhan. And then as it became like really obvious that China had done a better job than us, we just dropped China out of the media entirely and replaced it with Italy, who were like struggling. You know, this is exactly what we do during the European Championships, right? We drew against, we drew against Hungary, so we were feeling low. So actually, back page, Italy lost against France. That's even worse, you know. So we get to feel this kind of displaced kind of frustration with ourselves. And US now is the centerpiece. Now we've done even worse than Italy. The US is in the media. So instead of playing it out in the football, we're playing out the same kind of emotional nationalism with different countries in the kind of coronavirus response. And also probably the strangest is that, you know, countries like Germany just haven't been mentioned like in the UK media at all, because they've done a good job. And this is oddly the same as, you know, if we lose to Germany in the sort of quarterfinals of the Football World Cup or the European Championships, well, we just think, well, you know, what can you do? It's Germany. And the same things happened here, as if losing out to their welfare state and their better supplies of equipment and their much better structured social system is no more embarrassing or problematic than losing 2-0 in the quarterfinals. And so on the level of sort of feeling, these connections are there. And you can see our media kind of scrabbling around to kind of work these things through. And so there's the kind of background for it. And of course, I think part of this is also another thing to roll over from Brexit is this kind of spirit of division. You know, we were endlessly going on about leave versus remain. It's now been replaced by stay at home versus go out, and also other kinds of division like key workers and then not key workers, which played a key role here. And that then combines with this kind of war imagery, where, you know, and I think this is where a proper kind of Marxist analysis is probably needed, that the key workers primarily are working class, and there was a great opportunity here for any kind of left to seize upon. Suddenly, people who work in supermarkets, or let's say logistics, food delivery, food production, things like that, also care, also transport, could have suddenly had a much greater appreciation. Suddenly we were confronted by the coronavirus with the fact that actually our society really needs these people to run, right? This is not just about doctors and nurses, although it is. It's also about these kind of fundamental jobs that our society needs. And there was a great opportunity for example, a party called the Labour Party to seize upon there and make this something for the left, to say, actually, this is an opportunity to have a new approach to what is vital for this economy and society to function. And really, there's nothing more important, therefore, than labour rights and representation. Unfortunately, what's happened is this concept of the hero, which has kind of come in to mitigate that. So instead of thinking about, we're actually just sending these people back to work now, you know, and it's completely, I'm not exaggerating at all. It is completely a divide between the poorest people and the least privileged are going back to work, and the people who are wealthy enough to work in the tertiary industries like ours, who can do this by the computer, are staying at home. And then at the same time, instead of saying that there's an inequality there, we're heroizing these individuals by clapping out the window, but also by saying, well, they're heroes. And it's almost like that is actually the connection with war is a strategy deployed by the British media and by the Conservative Party, by the right-wing institutions, to try to make us feel this kind of nationalism. However, there's kind of a correct parallel here in that these people are being sent to the front, underfunded, underpaid, not protected, quite barbarically, and yet they are being told to experience themselves as heroes, and we are being told to experience them as heroes, on whom our society, civilization depends. And here again, I think you could have some interesting psychoanalysis and Marxism combined, because it's a question of subject positions, and of almost like a kind of a subject position which is designated by the political class structure. So, it's not just that we call them heroes, but we are inviting these individuals to step into a subject position where they are a hero, foundational for the ongoing continuation of this kind of neoliberal civilization that they support. So there's a very big kind of power dynamic here. And that's why, of course, when I am being this cynical, people will say, well, I work in the NHS and I love being clapped. Now, of course you do, and you shouldn't not, and we should still support those things. But the point is that this is a kind of class structure. It's not that it's wrong to do these things, but that you're inviting the working class into a subject position which has been determined by the ruling class, and asking them to think and feel in a way which is requisite to that position. So you're actually asking people to step into a kind of class structure and to feel they're part of it, where to kind of think that through would be, even just to say it in those kind of everyday terms, would, I think, be a kind of Marxist psychoanalytic argument. So I'm going to sort of move from that kind of backdrop of what the situation here is, and I do think it's very similar across Europe. I'm not as clued up in how it is in your location. There are certainly similarities in the US, and odd similarities as well, like really bizarre ones about the connection between the strength of the political left and those fighting for workers' rights and what happened here. So you've recently had Sanders drop out of the race and for the Democratic candidacy, and Biden becoming that candidate. That is really the same pattern as we had here during the first phase of coronavirus, where Keir Starmer took that role. And so you just sort of see that you had a kind of left and a right, and it's just kind of shifted to here, where your two central parties are in a different sort of completely different relationship to each other politically, at the very time when you need a workers' party and workers' rights more than ever. I'm interested to hear if there are similarities. I'm just going to sort of move from that to thinking about something else, which is a little bit more. I'm going to like jump to a different kind of aspects of this, and then try to kind of connect the two things by using this kind of concept from psychoanalysis of disavowal. And that is to think about conspiracy theory. I don't know if there are any over there that are going around. We've had some pretty good conspiracy theories over here about coronavirus. The main one, of course, is the 5G conspiracy. So, yeah, no doubt you've seen that. So the idea that this was in Iran and in Wuhan, the 5G network was being rolled out earlier, and there's a connection between the origin of the coronavirus and the 5G network. That has its nationalisms as well, because I don't know if you know the history of what was on Twitter called the Huawei Wars, which is the most hilarious kind of battle between T-Mobile and which is EE here, and Huawei, the Chinese phone producer, of which this is unfortunately one. So, this is being recorded twice, and so basically there's this kind of battle over the 5G space, and Trump has got involved in it, made comments about how we shouldn't support Huawei and things like that. Amazing story about how Huawei secret agents went to the US and got jobs in T-Mobile factory over there, and then they stole a robot, which was called Tappy, and sort of ran back to China with this robot to try and steal its knowledge, and then they were kind of caught and had to kind of send it back in the post or something. So it's almost this kind of comedic kind of war between these two kind of giants, which is built up in race relations. And that's partly where this 5G thing comes from. The reason why we turn to these conspiracy theories and so on can be because we're so frustrated with the kind of, let's say, platform capitalism, that the kinds of corporate capitalism that we're living in. So you get people switching this kind of to this kind of conspiracy about and I think this is touching on something really fascinating and fascinating for psychoanalysis as well. And another is the Bill Gates one, that Bill Gates knew about this first, amazing. I mean, just to say, I generally quite susceptible to conspiracy theories. I definitely don't think anyone's been on the moon, for example. And, there's a line somewhere, but, I'm definitely receptive to them, obviously. And I was sort of thinking about why this is. And I think it is, it connects to what I've been talking about the first kind of half of the talk, which is that it's so absolutely obvious that what we're being told is completely fabricated in many ways. We could also look at this through the graphs and the numbers, the kinds of graphs that our government has been sharing, particular kinds of graphs which kind of skew things towards a particular narrative that it wants to push. Even scientific studies as well. For example, one I find incredibly frightening is that the BBC, our main broadcaster, we had studies note that black African American minorities were suffering almost 3 times more likely from coronavirus, and we had kind of BBC commissioned studies saying that this was to do with genetics, and obviously it's not to do with genetics at all. It's to do with class demographics and how underprivileged certain race demographics are within, especially urban areas like London. So it's a kind of tactic to use science to explain away a problem instead of actually attacking the political roots of it. And that goes also to the title of Politicizing a Crisis and what this is all about. This is all about seeing that this is actually much less a sort of scientific or biological issue than it is a political one. So I think that people jump to conspiracy because we absolutely know that the mainstream narrative is lies. And this puts us in a really complicated position. And actually, I don't know, if a lot of research has been done on conspiracy theory and stuff, of course. And one of the sort of scary things is that it really tends to kind of favour the right wing in a lot of ways. You often find, famous online conspiracy communities. Probably the biggest of our moment is the QAnon conspiracy saga, which is a kind of anti-Clinton, anti-NSA conspiracy theory, which is hosted on 4chan, the right-wing leaning image board, which contains some pretty horrendous content, actually. And so you actually see conspiracy theory being used a lot by the far right, but not so much by the left. I think this is really interesting state of affairs, that we're sort of caught in an impasse where we absolutely know that the narratives we're being told, including the graphs, including the science, are often completely fabricated. I don't even want to say biased. I want to say that it's made up. For instance, a good conspiracy theory around here is that Boris Johnson faked having coronavirus. I would find that much easier to believe than that he got it. I think it seems so much more likely that would be constructed, but then that it would have actually happened. And also, even if it did have it, it's still a valid interpretation because it's clearly been deployed. It's been deployed precisely to say that this is a universal thing, that even the ruling classes can get it, and we're all in this together. And that is exactly the message that the British government needs to hide its own kind of class prejudices and inequalities. So it's either the most fortuitous thing that's ever happened to him, or they pretended he had it, or somewhere in between, he got a bit sick and they saw a huge opportunity here to deploy a different kind of narrative that would perfectly suit, you know, the one that the government wanted people to take away. So I sort of think now the thing that I was kind of trying to puzzle out, which is the overall kind of argument of what I want to say here, is how such a situation can exist where we all know, or most of us know, or lots of us know, that what we're being told is completely untrue. And yet we, you know, and I don't actually think anything I've said is particularly eye-opening. People probably mostly agree. And yet we can acknowledge that, and yet we continue to live as if we don't. So we know full well that we're being kind of lied to by the ruling classes and their media outlets about what's happening with the coronavirus. But yet we sort of continue our daily lives as if we don't. And like, for example, with the social distancing, I mean, don't get me wrong, I have never broken social distancing. I'm not one of those flouters of the social distancing rules. I've basically been inside the whole time. And I'm probably going to stay inside much longer than the government is going to allow, because they obviously want to get the economy started rather than protect people. But at the same time, it does show us something rather frightening, that on the one hand, you're looking at this kind of set of messages which you know to be completely false, and at the same time, your manner, your style of walking is completely conforms to what the government has said. And what you see here as well is the second that the government says we can relax measures, people's behaviour completely changed. So it was on a couple of days ago, it was last Wednesday. Last Wednesday, the government, I mean, you probably saw it in the media because they didn't really say anything. They just said, well, you can go out now, but no, you can't. And actually, you can see your friends, but only if it's Tuesday. And then you can only go 2 meters away from each other unless they live with you. And it was just sort of a slightly ambiguous message. And instantly, people's behaviour changed. And I don't just mean everyone's a conformist. Not at all. I include myself in this. It's much more psychoanalytic than that. Our actual behaviour changed. Not just, oh, I can go out now, so I'm going to get a beer in the park, but actually the way people would move their hands towards each other in supermarkets was suddenly changed, right? And I for example, people pretty much universally using one, you know, when you do the chip and pin, the culture, we also have this kind of nectar card, which means a sort of supermarket point system, which is like the first ever kind of surveillance state thing, you know, where it records everything you want to buy and then like tells you can have 2p off your avocado, but like they've got your data footprint in exchange. Anyway, the point is you put your card in the machine and then use that card to push the digits so that you don't touch with your finger the keypad. That instantly stopped on one day. And then also you just notice it in people's mannerisms, not just the distance, but the style and the laziness of it. So what you're looking at here is a relationship between a government message issued by the ruling class and instinctual everyday behaviour, right? And not just people's decision-making processes based in the government's instructions, but that we instinctively, unconsciously respond to changes in the ruling class's message. So it's almost like our bodies are reacting to the government's message rather than our minds. And that is the kind of limit that psychoanalysis tries to understand, that kind of connection between the kind of bodily or desire or drive or affect or instinct and the kind of outside world. And I think that could be interesting to sort of start there. So how does this situation arise where, on the one hand, this is my kind of overall kind of research question that I'm making up as I go along. On the one hand, you have a situation where we absolutely know, consciously and clearly, that we're being lied to, or that this is a message not to be trusted, or not, at least not fully to be trusted. And then, on the other hand, on a daily, everyday level, even on a behavioural level, we proceed to exist and live as if we believe the message, which we don't believe. How do you get a kind of situation like that? And I think that the best way to unpack that is through this concept of fetishist disavowal. It's discussed in Freud and in Lacan, but it's most famously associated with the psychoanalyst Octave Manoni, who described it as precisely this. He used this phrase, "I know very well X, but nevertheless X." Right? I think Zizek has also mentioned it somewhere. And basically the idea is, I know full well that this thing is true, but I continue to behave as if it isn't. And for him, it's a sort of psychosocial, psychological concept. It's part of how our minds work, is to kind of have this kind of double knowing, not knowing of this kind of thing. In this crisis, I think, the Marxism of that becomes very apparent. That, as I've tried to explain, this system appears to have something to do with criticizing and knowing the lies or recognizing the lies of the ruling class, but continuing to exist in their system as if you took them at their word, or almost unconsciously you accepted what you consciously know to be questionable. And I think it might come down to a kind of question of what's the word? Futility. It's a real, I mean, this is a depressing end to a talk, but I think it speaks to how limited our ability to change things are. And this may explain why the left has migrated back to the centre, because the reason why, I guess my hypothesis is that the reason why we consciously know that the ruling class are telling us a load of lies, but unconsciously exist as if they weren't, is because we're completely powerless to change anything about it. And we've just tried. It feels like this is a moment where we've just tried to do something about this economic situation, right? We've tried, for example, a lot of what I've said today is referred to the BBC. We've just tried to almost render the BBC obsolete by building new left media outlets, right? But that project seems to have sort of stalled somewhat, although there has been great success in building new media outlets. For instance, Political Critique, which is over there with you guys. And at the same time, we were trying to get a Bernie Sanders government and a Corbyn government, and candidates like Ocasio-Cortez, who would, and Rebecca Long Bailey over here, who would actually do something about this situation. So challenging both the governments and the media at the same time. And this seems to be a moment where that has proven a failure for now, at least. And so this psychoanalytic idea that we accept something, even though we know it's false, is actually bound up in a kind of Marxist thing, where the reason why that happens is because you're rendered powerless by this kind of economic structure. So we can sort of take this concept from psychoanalysis, which refers to a sort of psychological process of knowing something consciously but unconsciously continuing as if you didn't, and apply it to a class system where basically you know X is not true, but you can't change it anyway, so easier to carry on as if X were true. So, I mean, that I think is the kind of depressing conclusion to this talk. But, you know, with the kind of epilogue that, you know, recognizing that and carrying on the task, I think is that is where the left needs to get to kind of rebuild, to sort of see how our everyday behavior and our feelings and emotions are bound up in those economic structures, which we often think we're opposing, right? So I could go back to the first example I gave today, which was the clapping, that the positive feeling of unity and collectivity which comes with the clapping is not actually separate from the economic system which makes the clapping necessary, or from which it kind of emerges. And so here I think is a reason why, you know, if it's true that the left is in a really bad position where a lot of its attempts have just failed and we're feeling more powerless than ever, then one route out of this might be to recognize how political our everyday feelings and emotions are. And, you know, I find this on a personal level too. I live in quite a bourgeois area, I would say, of London. And, you know, people are you know, they are generally speaking well-meaning, and I mean, in the sense that they mean good, and they just want to do the clapping because they feel good. And there's a lot of political potential there. And if we could reach a situation where we kind of recognised that our libidinal desires, drives, feelings, affects were implicated in political and economic conditions, we would be able to actually harness that potential instead of just kind of wasting it on something which essentially endorses the existing government. You know, and a lot of this has to come to do with this also question of politicizing. You know, if we're to do this title of this talk being politicizing a crisis, I think it has to be about politicizing behaviors, politicizing desires, politicizing drives, and actually kind of harnessing this, because, you know, millions of people are actually doing this clapping, for example, or giving to the NHS charitably. You know, the political energy to change things is there. And as long as we go on thinking that these things are not political, you know, it's just about doing a bit of good, it's just about supporting our fellow humans and things like that. As long as we go on believing that they're not political, that they're apolitical, we won't harness that political energy to lobby for real change. So you know, to kind of summarize what I'm saying, I think that you know, it is a bad moment, and there's lots to be concerned about looking at the way that we've responded to coronavirus, both the politicians, the media, and ourselves. But that there's also a kind of great potential there, and it's my view that, you know, Marxism and psychoanalysis could combine to work out how to harness some of this political potential and build more of a kind of left-wing movement going forward. And I think that can also be done without convincing people to read Freud. You know, it can be done in an everyday way, like the way we've spoken about it here as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and see if people have questions, comments, and things like that. I think I talked for about 50 minutes, but hopefully you found it in some way interesting.
Thank you. Yes, it has been very interesting, and congratulations on being able to talk for 50 minutes without any pictures or videos to show us. So great, thank you so much for the fascinating talk. And I'm sure that it has rung many bells with our participants. So the floor is open for questions.
Yeah, or if people have comments or anything, also feel free to just pop them in the chat. Yeah, there's a chat there. You can either unmute, I guess, and ask, or you can just pop a question. I think someone is in the chat asking about that. You can just pop it there, or you can ask.
Guys, so if you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself and go on.
Okay, may I start?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, somebody asked a question on the chat, so I don't know if you want to answer that first or...
All right, I haven't...
No, I've got it. So the question is...
All right, yes, I
okay, the question's hard. The question is, what is wrong with nationalism inherently? Well, I guess that's very, very, very complicated. And I guess there's sort of various ways of answering it. In this case, I guess the first answer is, I mean, I do think nationalism is wrong inherently, but in this case, I'm not really talking about nationalism being inherently wrong. I'm talking about it being deployed to support a particular ruling class and a particular agenda. You know, I think this is, your question is a very good one. You know, and I think my answer is, this is more about class than it is about nationalism. It's about a particular kind of nationalism being deployed to serve a particular class's interests. So yeah, you know, your question is also saying, is, you know, if every demographic is looking out for their own interest. You know, I think you're almost answering your own question. The problem with this these kinds of nationalism are that they are one particular very small group of ruling elites looking after their own interest at the expense of especially the most vulnerable members of their working community. You know, and it doesn't have to be that way. I don't know if it's implied that, you know, everyone will just look after their own, but it doesn't have to be that way. And we very nearly got a different set of policies into government in 2017, you know, so, and I think we would be looking at such a different situation with a great many less deaths, actually, in the short term and long term, if we had done so. So, you know, yeah, I think your question is really interesting, and this kind of nationalism is particularly a class-based one that I think we should oppose in order to sort of have a fair society, but also to save the more vulnerable and less privileged members of it where possible.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes.
May I? Okay, so it's not so much a question, but an observation or exchange of some information. So you've said about Captain Tom, right? How much has he collected? 20 million?
I think it might be even more than that. It's the most of any kind of. I'm going to try and find out.
Okay, because in Poland we have something called Hot 16 Challenge. I don't know if you're familiar with hip hop vernacular.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what a 16 is, right? In a rap song.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I haven't seen this phenomenon.
Yes. Yeah, so people are challenged to record their raps and pay money to support the medics. And everybody sort of got on the craziness, even the Polish president, who is, I mean, he's from the ruling party and he's sort of personally responsible for the poor situation of the medics. He actually participated in the challenge, whereas the challenge is directed like implicitly against him. Yeah, so we have something like that
the
here.
Prime Minister to do.
Yeah, he challenged the Prime Minister actually to record his verse.
Right.
You have politicians, actors, everybody's just recording short rap snippets.
I mean, I think that's very, very interesting. In some ways, it's slightly preferable because, you know, at least, I don't know, at least it seems like in touch with the modern world in some way and with popular culture.
When it comes to the president, you should. Yeah, you haven't heard the president rap. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I need to see how. Yeah.
Man.
I think this is the point. I mean, you know, we mustn't lose sense of this. It's quite scary, I think, how the role that charity is playing here. Again, you feel like you need to qualify it every time. Of course, I think we should give to charity, but the increasing role that charity is playing in neoliberal states is because there is inadequate taxation and support systems in the first place. So, you know, it's fine, we should give to charity, but those points, like, you know, that the Prime Minister getting involved in it do kind of illustrate how it's being used, and how easily we forget that actually we mustn't lose sight of the fact that we might want to give to charity, but we also need to lobby for a different kind of economics where these people, and these are the very people responsible for it. And then I think I am gonna watch. I mean, I would.
Justina just sent you the link.
Yeah, I've just seen the link, and you know, I'd encourage you to look at what Captain Tom looks like as well. I mean, I don't want to laugh at it. I'm not at all sort of laughing at an old 100-year-old man. But he wears the military badges, and you know, in every single photo he still wears the veteran stuff, and so it's all implicated in how these kinds of things work. And another example I forgot to give was there's this guy here, you probably don't know, he's called Ben Fogle. He's like a sort of British national hero from the telly, but he said that we should. He started a campaign that instead of clapping for the National Health Service, on one day we would sing Happy Birthday to the Queen, because it was the Queen's birthday. Now, and then, you know, and that is mad. I mean, he was actually bullied on Twitter and laughed at, and in the end, thankfully, you know, that wasn't allowed to go ahead. But the point is that there was a connection already between this kind of deep-seated nationalism and nostalgia for British Empire and the process of clapping, which made that even possible to think that we might sing happy birthday to our Queen, you know, instead of supporting the health service. And those connections are just, I guess it comes down to like content versus structure, you know, that the content is different, but the form is carried over from kinds of nationalism and even fascism.
Yeah, and just a second thing, if I may. You've read Zizek's new book, right?
The pandemic one?
Yeah.
Yeah, little bits. Yeah, they're not all.
Because when it comes to the military language, he actually says the same thing.
Oh, yeah?
That you spoke about, yeah.
I haven't seen that.
Used generally that this disease is presented as an enemy that we must fight. Right. Yeah, so it's the same. And it's the same thing here as well.
Yeah. I mean, and that's also something I think for like those people and especially students who are studying like on the literature side, and to think about this as kind of narrative as well, I think is really important. Like, you know, I don't know, do you have over there the live, this kind of live nature of it? Like on our websites, we've got like live reporting of the coronavirus all day, every day. You have got that?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I find that like incredibly bizarre, that the sort of liveness of it. And we're desperate to sort of work this out and tell a story with it. But we don't know how to tell a story with it because it's quite present and it's happening right now. And you can see, yeah, I think those of you sort of, if any students like study narrative and stuff like that, like how this crisis is like made into a narrative is really important. And I think that's also where we have to keep fighting on the left here, actually. Like, I guess one of the things I was trying to imply is that this should be on our side. You know, this crisis should be on our side here. You know, that's why I said there's an opportunity for any Labour Party or any Workers' Party. That what narrative is this crisis going to tell? Well, it should tell the narrative of new kind of workers' rights for those people that are vital and a kind of overhaul of our elitism. But it seems like it's being made to tell a set of very different stories. Which is where all that kind of war imagery comes in and stuff.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, could I ask you about your reading of Boris Johnson getting coronavirus? Because the way I think that somehow it came over, you know, the way that it, maybe at least in my circles, maybe, you know, it all depends on what kind of media you read. But the way that it came across to me was, oh my God, what an idiot. He got, you know, karma coming back to bite you in the butt, basically. So definitely, you know, not the narrative of we're all in this together, but rather, if you're stupid, then it comes back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good point. And certainly that was like, present on our sort of social media feeds without ever making it into the news, you know, but it should have done. I mean, obviously the point is that he was actually being very disregarding. He was like saying, well, I'll shake hands with anyone, you know, and there were like pictures of him shaking hands with people and then going into the press conference. So, you know, again, I think this element of it was there. It was very marginal, and for the most part, people were much quicker to absorb the narrative that it shows that this is a universal fight where all classes need to come together. And on top of that, there was another aspect of it around the fact of him having. It seems to have sort of legitimized his position as, I mean, he almost like he said he came through it because of his masculinity. It's so strange how it's been deployed like that. Like what should have, presumably I was thinking, well, if he did get it, you know, perhaps he shouldn't, you know, he obviously drinks too much, he's obviously overweight, you know, isn't there some kind of sense that he's being shown he's well known as having a rather extravagant lifestyle, almost like a sort of rock star lifestyle. There's that, and yet nobody was sort of saying, you know, his sort of health conditions here. Instead, the media was saying, what a strong British man, you know, and making comparisons with Winston Churchill, you know, which frankly offensive, you know, that Winston Churchill has come back into our media as somebody to be celebrated. It's actually offensive, you know. But yeah, people, I think that point you made and that point I've just made about this, it shows again this kind of conspiracy theory thing. We somehow know that the story being told here is barely believable. And you know, people, I'm not one of these. One of the things I think is really important for general kind of building a political left is not to speak, not to assume people are foolish at all. Like a lot of talk in our media about how people who follow Boris Johnson or people who voted for Brexit are just kind of stupid people, and the phrase sheeple, you know, they'll just do what they're told, they'll just believe anything. You know, I think we need to do away with that patronising attitude towards people. People absolutely know that what they're being told is rubbish, but somehow it still sustains itself. So yeah, no, I think that's an interesting point. There is another question here as well.
Yes, in the chat, yeah. Can you read it out?
Yeah, it says, how can workers unionize in these times to get better working conditions? And also says, I think it's harder than ever. Well, I don't know. I'd like to know why you think it's harder than ever. But I think maybe one positive to come out of this could be the strength of the unions. On BBC News this morning, the presenter, Emily Maitlis, who's a kind of government shill, she said, we're dealing with two problems. We're dealing with the grip of the virus and the grip of the unions who are preventing us from getting back to work. Something like that. So she actually compared the unions to the virus itself as two things that Britain has to grapple against. It's been, the clip has been circulating on Twitter this morning. So I think that shows that the government is actually worried about the unions. And it's the unions here anyway. I don't know what it's like over there, but it's the unions here that are pushing back against the schools opening through the teachers' unions and pushing back against other forms of employment resuming without sufficient protection and workers' rights. And people are unionising and joining unions, which I think that's possibly one of the few positive things to come out of this. I actually love this next question. Do you think that the left can't meme? Yeah, I don't. I think actually Lucas and I have done some work on memeing before. I'm just going to post you a link here, which now makes me seem very wrong. So how long ago was this? Just a few months ago, I wrote this about how Jeremy Corbyn would get into government partly because his supporters were learning to meme in a way that had previously been the domain of the right, but obviously I was wrong. But still, I do think that you know, meme as a you know, this idea, which is really from sort of 2015, 16, that the left can't meme, obviously comes from Pepe and the alt-right communities, which played a fairly prominent role in Trump getting elected or Trump's popularity building in the early stages. And yeah, so the answer is the left has learned to meme, and you know, I think those kinds of popular culture, speaking to an audience and sharing things in a way which our voting community share things, needs to carry on being a strategy of the left. A positive as well is that these kind of centrist politicians can't. So you know, they're just completely humorless and unable to communicate with these kinds of younger digital communities. So yeah, no, I think the left has learned to meme and must continue to meme, I guess, is the short answer to that.
So I have, I guess, a version of the left can't meme question. From your talk, it seems, however, that the right is way better at spinning those stories that stir emotions, that mobilize those energies, or the liberal middle, right? We are all in this together. that the left hasn't been able to do that so effectively.
Yeah.
Like the mechanism of compassion, for example, works so well, and it's so it doesn't bring any real effect, right? The clapping thing.
Yeah. So I've got sort of two different answers. One's more sort of direct reason for that, and then the other one I don't really know, but it's more speculative. I think it needs to be thought of. Is that one problem here is that the left hasn't actually been properly invited into mainstream discussions here anyway. So very influential things include things like Question Time, which is a kind of primetime political show where we have guests from the left and right to kind of debate. So like British TV, I think remains quite influential. There's a big history of the right being invited on to sell precisely those narratives, and the left not being so. Often the people that are there to represent the left are actually not very left-wing, or they are what I've started to call the private school left. So there are some kind of movements of people who have, I don't want to like say exact names because I do like these people in some way, and they are, you know, important interlocutors, but there are some people who have made themselves a big media personality on the left recently, and they tend to be from these kind of elite private schools, and you know, they speak in a particular kind of way as well. We're not actually getting, you know, Workers' Party people onto the mainstream news outlets at all. And even the outlets which claim to be towards the left, like The Guardian, are pretty bad at doing so, or have gotten even worse at doing so. So I think one answer is that the reason why those narratives succeed so well is because they are bolstered by those institutions who give the platform for those narratives to circulate. And then, of course, the much more complex answer is that, you know, it's been years that those things have been ingrained, and we have to acknowledge, I guess it's what Adorno argues about structures of fascism, that we have to acknowledge that we've grown up, in my case, in a Britain which has long history of associating positive emotions with nationalistic imagery. Even the popularity of something like Downton Abbey on TV would speak to that. So, you know, some of those feelings that we have also confront us with our own kind of prejudices, and the way in which our feelings are not so much co-opted by the right, but have actually been structured from the very beginning by nationalistic and right-wing discourse that we've absorbed through our whole lives. So, yeah, maybe there is a question of, maybe this is kind of inevitable and it will just take time for us to derive pleasures elsewhere. But we can also see that happening. You know, things like the kind of football song for Jeremy Corbyn, you know, people going, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn." It's kind of ironic mocking of a football chant, but repurposed to celebrate this kind of old, uncool Labour candidate. You know, so you do sort of see, you know, affect and libidinal energy moving for the left as well. And yeah, it has to. It certainly has to if it's to be successful. Because people want to feel good. They don't want to, you know, there has to be a pleasure associated with it. And that goes back to the memes, doesn't it? With the question of fun and play. It is actually important that those things should be kind of harnessed. I don't actually know much about BreadTube.
Right, so this is the next question. Do you think BreadTube is good at countering alt-right channels?
Yeah, I don't actually know much about BreadTube, but I think that, yeah, the left on alternative media is obviously very important. With YouTube in general, it can be tricky because there is a political demographic of YouTube, for example, but the same thing plays out in podcasting and things like that. And so, you know, actually, and also we need them too. I'm not commenting on this exact example, but generally speaking, I think it is important and actually necessary for the left to move in these kind of alternative media channels and social media channels, such as podcasting, video essays, YouTube communities, and so on. Because you're not getting in the mainstream press, so you know, got to be somewhere.
All right, thank you. Guys, any other questions?
Well, this has been pretty good, guys. I've enjoyed it. I've personally enjoyed it. I don't know about you.
I'm sure they have. I just want to make sure they don't have any other questions. Our students sometimes need a bit of a push. Alfie, just a comment. I'm really happy to listen to someone who is optimistic, and I know that obviously hope is important on the left, and so on. You cannot do without optimism. Nevertheless, when I have a look at what's going on and the changes that are coming, I can see that people precisely like us and generally the middle class will benefit from the pandemic, because our work will be more flexible and so on, and the people, the key workers will end up with maybe more expensive public transportation. Everyone else who can afford will be switching to cars, which I can see here living in the suburbs in Warsaw already happening. People, even though the country sort of started opening slowly and people started meeting one another, no one who can afford to use this any public transportation. So the way I see it now, the only people who will benefit are the ones that are already privileged. Can you see it in another way apart from the unions? I can understand that there is this sense of solidarity now that can be brought about by the crisis.
Well, I wish I could give a more. I mean, I didn't think I was being optimistic. In some ways,
to what I'm thinking you were.
But compared to I wish I could give more of an optimistic answer. I do feel that this is very. I think this is a very concerning time for the left. There's every indication that things are going to go on like this for some time, and that the beneficiaries of this crisis are going to be all the wrong people. On the other hand, I just guess I have this kind of sense that things can only get so bad. It's more like kind of Gramsci feeling that out of the crisis is a kind of potential. Like on the one hand, obviously we've got these governments who will love a crisis. It's the old kind of you never let a crisis go to waste thing, and use it to entrench the government and the conservative policies that we're kind of living under. But at the same time, this is a complete mess. I don't know what it looks like over there, but here it's a shambolic mess, and people have really realised that this is a government that doesn't fully know what it's doing, and it's kind of grasping at a lot of things here. So, that I suppose out of that, there's got to be some hope that there'll be a revolution of some kind. I don't know.
Yes. Thank you. All right, so we have one more question. Speaking about conspiracy theories and COVID, it is said that also Madonna, during her performance at Eurovision Song Contest, predicted the coronavirus. Have you heard about that?
It's just something to enjoy. Yeah, she probably did. I can believe it. No, I think the key with conspiracy theories is not each individual one, but to think about it as kind of symptom. Conspiracy theory as symptom, and obviously each of them kind of grasps for the truth in a rather direct way, but taken collectively, conspiracy theory as a symptom of distrust in central institutions, and also as, guess, pre-political energy. Guess what you could think of as pre-political energy. You know, moon landing deniers as a group of people who could potentially be harnessed to do great good for socialism, but who are somehow stuck in a world where they don't have any options but to, I don't know, run around looking for aliens in Area 51 or something.
All right.
Okay, there was one more question, I think. What do you think of the new Black Panther coalition attacking Chinese merchants in the US?
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think it's very relevant to raise that point, and we shouldn't lose sight of the kind of anti-Asian racism that is present, but not only in, you know, as I kind of tried to point out, maybe more gently, not only in far right activist groups, but in mainstream media and presidents. You know, so I think that's very pertinent to keep in full view the kinds of anti-Chinese racism which we're seeing, and also, as I sort of tried to do in the talk, and I've not fully explored this, but the point is that this is not disconnected from economic conditions, that this kind of, these nationalisms, as I've sort of said, are connected more to class issues, but also globally, you know, this kind of rise in anti-Chinese sentiment in the US and in you know, actual, you know, among actual power shareholders of power in the US, you know, that is also bound up in this kind of geopolitical capitalism wars. So I think to address those kinds of racism, you also need this kind of economics and class analysis of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Right, definitely. Thank you. Yeah, I was shocked to see that kind of racism also in Poland, in a place that I wouldn't expect it. So I was going away for the weekend, and there is a spa on the way, and there is this huge billboard, and it was advertised by Asian models. And now they changed the billboard. It has been there for like years, and now suddenly they changed the billboard and there are no models, just the logo of the spa.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Is there any sort of significant, like, opposition party, or like at the moment during coronavirus, is there like a significant movement like to get rid of the sitting government at all?
No.
No,
not really.
it's mad. It's mad. And I mean, over here we've even got, you know, we do have this kind of two-party structure, and we even have this kind of the leader of the opposition saying things like, "Well, now's not the time to really challenge the government. Let's kind of get behind them," which is the absolute opposite of what I think is the case.
We have parties that are in opposition and they do not want to support the government. They criticize the government, but well, they are just absolutely useless.
Right.
There's actually a presidential election coming up.
Oh yeah.
In Poland. I don't know if you've heard about the whole commotion.
No, not really.
Okay. I'm not gonna get into the details, but actually the candidate from the opposing party started with like, she had like 30% or something of support, right? I don't know if I remember this correctly. And she dropped out of the political race. She started with 30, and now she had like 4, and she dropped out, and they put forth a new candidate.
See, that's, you know, that's so interesting, and that is again this kind of psychoanalysis issue, because it's like, how do people respond to crisis? You know, this is something I probably should have made more central, actually, is that, like, you know, how we respond to crisis, we instinctively sort of retreat and go for like no change and retreating into security and things like that. And this is a crisis where it should be the opposite. You know, this is a crisis which should have propelled us to make fundamental changes, but somehow instinctively we sort of retreat to keeping the status quo for times like this, and say things like, well, it's a turbulent time, let's leave that for later, which is totally the opposite of what's needed.
Mm-hmm.
I think in many ways the problem here has been that the message that the left has been trying to send out since all of this began was very much in accordance with what our right-wing conservative government has been saying. So if you see the left as wanting to protect essential workers, right, protect the general public, then the message has been stay at home. And this is precisely the message that we had been getting from peace. In fact, the opposition that is like being voiced right now is coming from people like Korwin-Mikke or like the extreme nationalists who are saying, no, we need the economy to, we need to get the economy restarted. So in a way, this has made it difficult to criticize the government in many ways.
Yeah, it's very interesting to compare that to our situation, because I wouldn't say that was the case here. Of course, we have had the stay-at-home message, but the overall impression is that the government wants to have best of both. They actually are kind of telling you to go out, but they want you to spend money as much as possible, and they want to get the economy started, and that is the priority. But they still want to have the image that they've done everything they can. That's why we shut down so much later than everyone else, and we are reopening already. So they've sort of tried to kind of walk this kind of balance between the narrative about the economy and the narrative about staying home. And I think it's really clear that they actually want to open things up. They're not that bothered about people dying, but they have to play to that story as well. Which I think, so I wouldn't say what you said is I can certainly see how it would be difficult to criticize the government in that situation. It probably doesn't apply here. Our government is ripe for criticism, just no one's doing it, except on social media where everyone is. Yeah, that's really it's very interesting to talk to you guys about, because for the most part it's the same situation that we're looking at, right? But with like these kind of small, but almost like the difference is kind of where you work it all out. I don't know.
All right. Do we have any more questions, comments? All right, the chat is. So, Alfie, I think that yes, this is the moment to thank you, and I have enjoyed it, and the Q&A was way longer than it is usually. So.
Good. Yeah, I know. I found all the questions really, really interesting, and really thanks for listening and for doing this with me. I really got a lot out of it actually. So thanks so much, guys, for inviting me. It's been really nice. I was supposed to be there in person, so hopefully one day I'll get over there and see you for real.
Yes, I'm sure we will be able to do it next year or later. So thank you, and thank you guys for participating. We had about 60 people, so hey. All right.
Thank you. Thanks so much. See you again.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Bye.